So for our final panel of the day, I'd like to introduce or reintroduce Irene Liu, partner with PwC Southeast Asia Risk and Regulatory Consulting. We've met Irene a few minutes ago as one of the new leaders in Asia for Women in Data Group. And Irene, thank you for taking on that role. Our keynote speaker earlier, Vincent Joy, spoke about public-private collaboration, development of common taxonomies, and a way to improve operations via improved data management. This panel is going to discuss and explore possible solutions to modernize and improve regulatory reporting through the collaborative development and common information technology standards. Now, for this panel, I'm not going to moderate, and I'm happy to turn over the moderator microphone to you, Irene, and I'm going to be on the panel, so you get to drill me with interesting questions. And of course, we are going to be joined, if the next slide comes up, by Mark Perez, Director of the Department of Supervisory Analytics at the Central Bank of the Philippines. So Irene, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, John. Can you all hear me well?
Perfectly, yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much. Okay, so I'm really excited to be hosting this digital regulatory reporting panel, right? So whilst I'm a consultant now, I didn't really grow up in the ivory tower as a consultant. I've been working in the banking industry with more than 70% of my time devoted to managing regulatory returns. And as a result, this kind of topics around, digitization, in order to reduce the time and efforts, makes me really excited. So perhaps let me start off this session by talking through some of the common challenges in regulatory reporting. So the first challenge is really the lack of common industry interpretation. So within each country, there's a lack of a common industry interpretation of reporting requirements, including regulatory reporting. So how each bank has coped with this interpretation needs is through the reliance on multiple clarification sessions with their regulators, through exposure drafts, and also consultants like us, right, who help them to bring consistency, hopefully, within the industry, and also the internal subject matter expert resources as well. But because of this, there's significant duplicated efforts that incurred across banks within the industry to independently interpret new industry-wide reporting requirements. So definitely this is neither time efficient nor cost efficient as well. Now the second challenge that we have over here is the lack of comparability of the reports. So the lack of a common industry interpretation actually is the underlying basis of this issue that we see over here. Now this is exacerbated when data required for consolidation and comparison across banks, as is the case for statutory reporting and or regulatory reporting. There is therefore a lack of comparability by analysts when comparing financial disclosures, and there is also a lack of consistency when such information is consolidated for analysis by regulators. Now, the last challenge that we see is really now the lack of consistency across borders. Most of the banks that we have actually operate in multiple jurisdictions. Now, this is a real operational issue because there is no consistency in reporting requirements across countries. Hence, each bank will have to cope with disparities in reporting requirements for countries in which the bank operates in. And now, all of this requires customized data models for each reporting jurisdiction. So these are the three key reporting challenges. Now, if we're talking about what are the key trends that we see, in the following slide, we have 5 key trends to share with you. So the first of which is really the increasing granular data submissions that's required by the regulators. In fact, just now Vincent alluded to it as well, right? So 2 recent highlights that we have seen on this trend. One, which is further away, which is the MiFID II in UK and the EU, which has expanded the scope of the existing transactions and instruments to be reported. And then the second, which is closer home over here in Asia, is really the MAS 610 in Singapore, which required banks to report granular details of the balance sheet and off-balance sheet information. So it expanded from 20 pages to about 200 plus pages. and data elements now totaling about 340 data points across 67 reports. So this is just symptomatic of the regulators wanting to do a more holistic analysis of the bank's performance and risks, and subsequently aggregate the view of the systemic risk within the industry. Now, the second key trend over here is really the streamlining of the regulatory reporting requirements. So with an average of about 217 regulatory updates made per day globally, so regulators are receiving data from banks at a volume that is now becoming very difficult to manage and analyze. So hence, regulators such as those in Singapore, Philippines, and Thailand are taking some radical changes to do the following. The first of which is they are now analyzing which reporting requirements do they truly need. That's the first point. The second one is to look at how do they streamline and reduce, and they call it deduplication of the data required for their reporting purposes. Thirdly, is also looking at what kind of data can be eliminated altogether. So this will then result in multiple changes through the course of the next few years in terms of the regulatory reporting process and also the reports in itself. In the third key trend that you see, it's about the key collaboration on the definitions and taxonomy. And in fact, John, you alluded to it earlier, right? So, in terms of our keynote speaker, Vincent, he was also talking about the mention of the regulator industry collaboration on the industry taxonomy. So this has been successfully demonstrated in Singapore when about 13 banks joined an MAS 610 Open Taxonomy Consortium to distill more than the 340 data points into 1,000 reusable business concepts. So that is only in Singapore. Further away from Singapore, in the UK side, from a digital regulatory reporting initiative perspective, this is led by the BOE and the FCA. One of the conclusions in the earlier phases of the work is that as a precursor to codified regulations, you will need to be able to develop key industry standards for data, data taxonomy, and as well as an aligned definition. So this is exactly one of the key focus areas for DRR phase 3 in itself. The fourth key trend that we see is that regulatory authorities are also encouraging technology advancements that go beyond the financial institutions. So while regulatory reporting technology has been historically targeted at the institutional level, the bigger question has always been posed to the supervisors, right, in terms of the use of SupTech and whether such SupTech innovation and advancements could go beyond the institution to the wider industry. And so you'll see this trend in terms of the DRR as well. So, and most recently in April 2020, there was a G20 Tech Sprint that was launched as a joint initiative between BIS Innovation Hub and as well as the Saudi G20 presidency, designed to showcase the potential for such new innovative technologies. Last but not least, this is the cross-border collaboration and the regulator bank conversions. So in Southeast Asia, regulators and banks occasionally come together in formal forums such as the ASEAN, the UK ASEAN Business Council, ASEAN Financial Innovation, the Network, and as well as the ASEAN Bankers Association to drive cross-border discussions, to share best practices, innovations, and improve collaborations and standardizations. So this has definitely encouraged a regulator bank conversions, with the trends being more considerate regulations and reporting requirements that will not inhibit innovation for banks. So with this, I pause here, and I'd like to invite both Mark and also John to join me on this panel. Okay, so maybe it's not, given that I've talked so much about digital regulatory reporting and its challenges, right? First of all, my first question is digital regulatory reporting the real solution for the challenges faced by the industry? So maybe in the first place, I'll get Mark to answer it from a regulatory perspective.
Thank you very much, Irene, and I'd like to thank EDMC for inviting me to join this particular panel. Certainly a lot of the things that Irene has mentioned with regard to the challenges as well as the trends in the industry are aligned with what I typically hear what other regulators are also doing across their various jurisdictions. As you know, regulators and supervisors are expected to use the tools that are available to enhance their ability to deliver on their mandates. So given that digital transformation has been the norm for the industry for at least the last 10 years, it's not surprising that the same is happening in central banks all over the world. With these technology advances happening around us and hardware and software solutions becoming more powerful and cost efficient, it's not really going to make much sense not to migrate to a digital reporting platform. After all, these platforms enable improved completeness, accuracy, and timeliness apart from the capabilities that you otherwise would not have available unless it is digitized, such as the use of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and natural language processing. At the BSP, as with many other jurisdictions, BSP, the Central Bank of the Philippines, digital regulatory reporting is a cornerstone for our digital transformation roadmap. And in many cases, it is the primary use case for the digital transformation. That said, there are also other considerations. First is readiness. We need to ask all the time whether the supervised institutions are well positioned to move to a digital reporting platform. It's a buy-in thing. Mandating is pretty straightforward. You write a regulation, you send it out, tell them you need to comply by a particular date. But that's not how it works. Regulators pay attention to the mandates, but at the same time, we also look at how long will it actually take before the supervised institutions are even ready to get on board, even if they really wanted to, right? So not just for compliance, but for actual use. Second is the importance of aligning digital regulatory reporting with supervisory objectives. It may not be appropriate to move to digital for digital's sake, although obviously it's practical. It doesn't always make sense to adopt new technologies just because it's the shiny new thing and you don't want to miss out, right? As a regulator, we always need to take a step back and ask, how does this actually help me achieve my safety and soundness objectives and mandates, for example? So you don't acquire a Bugatti when the roads have potholes, and a motorcycle will do quite nicely. So I think that's an important analogy. Thank you.
Well done. Thank you so much, Mark. Now, I'd like to hear from John as well, right? Given that you were previously from the Federal Reserves. So I'd like to hear your views from that perspective as well.
Sure. First of all, will it work, and is it an objective to modernize? And I say absolutely yes. But I do want to step back for a second, Irene, and say it's not really a matter of technology or data, it's a matter of will. We've been talking about this for quite a long time. Banks and regulators have had lots of discussions around how to modernize regulatory reporting, to drive it. When we say digital, really that's really another way of saying standards, right? Because we have to agree on how we represent the financial instrument and the exposure to that financial instrument in a common way. So when that data is reported from multiple entities, the regulators, and Mark, you said it, the role of the regulator to achieve safety and soundness is going to depend upon how quickly they could grab that data, aggregate that data, and analyze that data, right? And I know from my own experiences, when data comes in from all different places and it's disparate, it takes a long time to unwind back and forth with the reporting entities, so it slows down the process. The key thing here is, will the regulators and the banks sit in the room together? Will the regulators be willing to sit in the room and not have their pen ready to write an MRA or an MRIA? And will the banks sit in the room and be open and honest about their operations without fear of reprisal? When we achieve that, and we put both of those entities at the same level, they will work together and make it happen. And we're seeing it. As you pointed out, Irene, the work that the MAS did a couple of years ago was fabulous. Multiple banks got together, agreed on taxonomy, reduced what was thousands upon thousands of pieces of data down to the core granular data. And not only does that improve or remove the burden of all of the preparation the banks do, but it elevates the regulators' ability to do analytics, because now they have the data they could quickly analyze and do deeper dives in, instead of spending a lot of time unwinding, the less than transparent work. So I'm very hopeful, but again, it's going to take that commitment of will.
Thank you so much, John. Yeah, in fact, just now, you two, when you were talking, right, one thing that came to mind, and Mark, buy-in, right? Buy-in is something that struck me heavily, because when we go to the banks to talk about digitization, you're right, they must be ready, they need to have buy-in as well. So and likewise, for the supervisors as well, we talked about soundness, how do you use digital, right, to improve the soundness and the safety of the country. So we know that last year, BSP won the Data Management Initiative Award in the Central Banking, FinTech, and Regulatory Global Awards. So definitely, BSP has shown great progress in your data initiatives. So can you share with us, right, the role of SupTech in BSP, in enhancing the effectiveness of this regulatory oversight?
So thank you very much, Irene, again. Yes, the BSP was awarded last year for our data management initiative, primarily because this was a solution that we applied to address the growing concern of incomplete, late, or inconsistent reports from financial institutions. And data cleansing and validation was really time consuming. As John was mentioning, it's really aligning all the data points and making sure that all the data actually lined up together and mean the same thing. That's actually quite difficult. So the process in the Philippines then was highly manual and very resource intensive. So what we did in the BSP was to work with an accelerator program for a project that developed API tools to improve the speed, quality, and comprehensiveness of information for risk-based supervision. The solution was envisioned to reduce the cost of compliance as well as to improve timeliness, security, and quality of data acquisition. This in turn allowed us for a much faster generation of statistics that are used for various financial surveillance tools. Initially, we designed it as a push platform. It's always better to move into a transformation using something that's more familiar. So in this case, the platform is a push platform. The banks prepare it, and then they push to the BSP the data sets that we require. But we've already communicated even now that the intent is at some point to move it to a pull platform, wherein the BSP is able to pull the data from the systems that the banks have. Of course, again, because it's a buy-in journey, automatic reactions usually of financial institutions is, we're not going to let you go into our data directly, right? But at the end of the day, I think what we want to do is to be able to get it ready first. Let's start with push. Let's start with seeing it move forward, and then let's talk about pull when we're already stable. So basically, like just going back to the digital transformation journeys, I think it's important, and sometimes we miss this out, that we need to design digital transformation in a manner that also incorporates digital thinking. And what does that mean? It means you co-create. It means you co-create with the supervised entities what you want to do rather than just applying it directly. So in the case of the BSP, even with this API as well as our SupTech initiatives, we constantly engage with industry and we follow what we call a test and learn approach, wherein we use light regulations first, just to guide us as to how the final regulation will look like, and then engage with the industry in practicing what we want to achieve. So this API initiative is one of those, and it established a direct machine-to-machine transmission between the supervised institutions and the BSP. And surprisingly, we even had a couple of rural or provincial community banks that was able to participate. And this was by virtue of them using core banking systems that were hosted on the cloud. So what does this tell us? It tells us that you don't have to be a big bank in order to participate in a technology initiative. Certainly, you have to be familiar with what their existing situation is. And we wanted to do this, we wanted to pay attention to data acquisition because the next stage is for us to move into data analytics. We do have certain data analytics capabilities that we are growing, but we are not yet at that level wherein we can already say that we have achieved the goal of augmented supervision. By augmented supervision, what we mean is you use data science techniques to augment what you normally do, what normally the examiners do and the supervisor. It is not intended to replace the supervisors and turn the analytics into a black box. It is intended to enhance the capability of the supervisors and the examiners to examine their banks in an efficient manner. And this goes in hand with the Philippines recently passed a new Central Bank Act, RA 11211, which actually changes also how we are able to supervise the financial institutions and the scope of what we are able to supervise. And together with that, we also initiated a new supervisory assessment framework, which moves away from the CAMELS rating into something that's more akin to understanding the business models and analyzing the performance of the banks based on their established business models, which is actually very data intensive and very reliant on offsite monitoring.
Irene,
Thank you so much, Bob.
if I could just
Yes.
jump in on one to further Mark's comment. He speaks about engagement. And the best way to engage the private sector is with a good business case. A couple of years ago, in the course of the activity that I was involved in, we looked at the business case from the perspective of the amount of time that banks spend. And there was a report generated by the OMB, that's the Office of Management and Budget in the United States. And in that report, one single report, the CCAR FROI 14M, was 600,000 hours to do that. And if you multiply that by what's the average cost of an analyst in 100,000 US, let's say, that was around $40 million just for one report. Okay. If you look at thousands of reports that we generate, and then many of them overlap. Gartner did a study that takes about 4 man weeks to prepare a report. So I did quick calculation. 6,000 reports, 4 man weeks, 12 months a year, 30 GSIBs. It came to about $25 billion. Now, obviously, we can't get rid of every report, but the point is, I think there's a strong business case for improvement. And the former chief data officer of the Bank of England had a great line. He said, most reg reports were invented before computers.
True.
So we have an obligation to digitize and to modernize.
Yes, and you'd be happy to note, John, if I may, Irene, speaking of business case, for the API project, the way we were able to get the banks on board to do this was, number one, we did it hand in hand with the rationalization of reports. So we started dropping reports. Number two, when we did the initiative, what used to be a report that had 100,000 data points was reduced to 45,000 data points.
Wow.
Number three, because we removed all the duplications, we went down to the child level of the data so that you don't need to collect even the highest level of the data. And then third, after the rationalization of the data set as well as the rationalization of the reports itself, we also paid attention to how quickly the reports were getting validated. So prior to the API initiative, the reports, when they submitted, they get validated 3 to 5 days after because they were manual. Now, if you get late in your submission, you get delayed submission penalties for your report and high levels of erroneous reporting. With the API initiative, the validation time was reduced from 3 to 5 days to 30 seconds. So by the time they submitted in 30 seconds, they received their validations, and which actually reduced the penalties that they would incur due to delayed submission. So business case is important.
Good. Thank you so much,
I
Bob.
must apologize. We're at the end of the session. So and boy, I could talk about this for a long time. So Irene, thanks again for moderating and setting up the panel. Mark, a pleasure. Of course, like everything else in the world, we meet virtually. Maybe someday we'll meet in person.
Definitely.
Actually, we'll do that. And with that, I thank you. And that brings our DataVision 2020 to a close.